The holographic displays flickered with a kaleidoscope of alien languages, translating the diplomatic proceedings of the Galactic Confederacy's most prestigious assembly. Towering representatives from 100 different species filled the circular chamber, their bodies a mesmerizing array of biological impossibilities. Crystalline beings that shifted like living light stood next to silicon-based life forms that pulsed with internal energy. Gaseous entities contained in intricate environmental suits floated near silicon-based humanoids with skin like polished metal. And then there was the human delegation. Lieutenant Michael Reynolds stood at the far end of the massive chamber, a solitary figure among giants. His standard-issue United Earth Diplomatic Corps uniform looked almost quaint compared to the elaborate, technology-infused attire of the other representatives, where they had holographic interfaces embedded in their clothing and bioadaptive environment controls. He had a simple black uniform with minimal technological augmentation. The Zornak ambassador, a towering creature that resembled a cross between a praying mantis and a living crystal formation, stepped forward. Its multiple compound eyes shifted through a spectrum of colors, a biological display of emotional complexity that would take human scientists decades to fully understand. Humanity's admission to the Galactic Confederacy, the Zornak began, its voice a combination of clicking mandibles and electromagnetic resonance, is a matter of procedural necessity. A ripple of barely contained laughter moved through the assembled delegates. Reynolds remained absolutely still, his posture military perfect, his expression unchanged. The crystalline consortium's representative, a being composed of interconnected geometric shapes that seemed to breathe and move with impossible fluidity, added its commentary. Earth represents less technological advancement than our civilization achieved millions of years ago. Their inclusion is a statistical anomaly, a bureaucratic footnote. Reynolds knew the statistics. Earth had been space-capable for barely a century. Their first faster-than-light drive had been developed only 37 years ago. Compared to civilizations that measured their technological progress in millions of years, humanity was indeed an infant. But infants grow, and this infant had teeth. The diplomatic hall was a marvel of engineering, suspended in geosynchronous orbit around a neutron star. The walls were transparent metamaterial that could shift between absolute opacity and complete transparency. Currently, they displayed a real-time galactic map, with humanity's tiny blue marker barely visible among the vast network of established civilizations. "We have reviewed Earth's technological submissions," continued the Zornak ambassador. "Your quantum computing is rudimentary. Your genetic engineering shows promise but lacks sophistication. Your interstellar travel capabilities are quaint." Another wave of condescending murmurs swept through the assembly. Reynolds knew each of these comments was backed by comprehensive data. Humanity's technological achievements were indeed primitive by galactic standards. But technology was only one measure of a species' potential. The chamber's environmental controls shifted subtly, a demonstration of the advanced climate manipulation technology common among spacefaring civilizations. Atmospheric composition, gravity, radiation shielding, all adjusted with microscopic precision to accommodate the diverse biological needs of the assembled races. Reynolds remembered his briefing. The Galactic Confederacy had existed for over 3 million years. They had seen civilizations rise and fall, watched entire species evolve and go extinct. To them, humanity was less than a blip, a momentary curiosity. What they didn't understand was human potential. As the diplomatic proceedings continued, Reynolds' neural implant, a piece of technology so advanced it was invisible even to most human scientists, processed the incoming data streams. He was collecting everything, every dismissive comment, every statistical comparison, every moment of condescension. Information was a weapon, and humanity was very, very good at weaponizing information. The Zornak ambassador concluded its statement with what could only be described as diplomatic contempt. "Earth is admitted, but let there be no illusion. You are here on sufferance. Prove your worth, or be forgotten." Reynolds allowed himself the smallest of smiles. Forgotten was something humanity had never been good at. The war room was a cathedral of desperation. Holographic displays cascaded with real-time data from 100 different star systems. Each flickering projection represented another world consumed by the Void Swarm, a predatory entity that defied every known law of biological and technological interaction. Where most civilizations saw space as a battlefield, the Void Swarm saw it as a feeding ground. Lieutenant Michael Reynolds stood at the periphery of the massive chamber, watching as the most advanced military minds in the galaxy confronted total defeat. The quantum projection map dominated the central platform, a three-dimensional representation of galactic space that pulsed with an ominous red infection. The Void Swarm moved like a cancer, consuming entire star systems with terrifying efficiency. Civilizations that had existed for millions of years were being erased in weeks. Admiral Zarakil of the Crystalline Consortium, a being composed of interconnected light and living mathematics, manipulated the holographic displays with precise neural commands. Her movements were calculated, each gesture a complex algorithmic dance that would have taken human computers millennia to compute. 23 systems lost in the last solar rotation, she announced, her voice a combination of harmonic frequencies that human ears could barely perceive. Defensive technologies from 17 different advanced civilizations have proven completely ineffective. The assembled military leaders represented the most technologically advanced species in the known galaxy. The Zornak with their biomechanical exoskeletons, the Silicon Collective with their distributed consciousness, the quantum harmonics of the Nexus alignment. Each had technologies that would have seemed like pure magic to humans just a century ago, and each had failed completely against the Void Swarm. Reynolds studied the tactical displays. The Void Swarm wasn't just a military threat. It was an existential nightmare. Whatever this entity was, it didn't simply destroy. It consumed entire planetary ecosystems, technological infrastructures, biological networks. All were broken down and integrated into its own incomprehensible structure. Our quantum entanglement weapons are ineffective, reported a Nexus alignment strategist. Its form was a shimmering holographic representation, continuously recalculating potential outcomes. The swarm adapts faster than our computational models can predict. It learns. It evolves. With each encounter, our defensive strategies become increasingly obsolete. The room fell into a heavy silence. Defeat wasn't just a possibility. It was becoming a mathematical certainty. Reynolds knew what they were thinking. How do you fight an enemy that learns faster than you can plan? An entity that doesn't just respond to your strategies, but actively deconstructs them at a molecular level. The tactical display shifted. Another system went dark. Another civilization erased. We have one final option, Admiral Zarakil announced. Her crystalline form shifted, displaying complex computational pathways that represented potential strategies. A deep infiltration mission, not to defeat the Void Swarm, but to understand it. The room turned toward her. We need an operative, she continued, who can penetrate their primary mothership. Someone whose cognitive and technological profile is so fundamentally different that the swarm cannot immediately categorize or predict their actions. Reynolds stepped forward. The room went silent. His file was legendary within Earth's military, not for conventional achievements, but for a series of missions that defied standard tactical doctrine. Improvisation wasn't just a skill for him. It was a weapon. I'll do it, he said simply. The alien military leaders studied him. A human, barely a century into space exploration, representing a civilization they had dismissed as technologically irrelevant. But something in Reynolds' eyes gave them pause. This wasn't bravado. This was calculation. This was humanity's true strength, the ability to turn the impossible into an opportunity. The mission was suicide. The chances of success were statistically non-existent. Reynolds smiled. Those were his favorite odds. The underground research facility beneath the Mojave Desert looked like nothing special from the surface. A simple maintenance complex, barely remarkable among the countless government installations that dotted the American Southwest. But 60 meters below ground, humanity was rewriting the laws of physics. Dr. Catherine Rodriguez moved with a controlled intensity that bordered on controlled mania. Her lab was a controlled chaos of impossible technologies, prototype systems that would have been dismissed as science fiction by most of the scientific community. Holographic interfaces danced around her, each projection a window into computational worlds that defied traditional understanding. "We're not just building a suit," she muttered, more to herself than to the team of engineers surrounding her. "We're creating a living system." Lieutenant Michael Reynolds stood perfectly still as the advanced diagnostic systems mapped every microscopic detail of his body. Quantum sensors probed his biological structure, creating a real-time map of his physiological and neurological systems that went beyond any medical scanning technology in existence. The experimental stealth shuttle behind him was another marvel of human innovation. Where alien spacecraft relied on massive energy systems and complex shielding, this craft was a study in minimalism and adaptive technology. Its exterior could shift molecular structures in milliseconds, becoming virtually undetectable across multiple spectrums of observation. "The nanotech integration is unlike anything we've ever attempted," Dr. Rodriguez explained to the handful of military observers. Her fingers danced across multiple holographic interfaces, each movement activating complex computational sequences. "We're not just augmenting the human body. We're creating a symbiotic system that can adapt faster than any known technological defense." The suit being developed for Reynolds was more than protective gear. It was a living weapon system that would become an extension of human capability. Microscopic nanobots, each one a complex computational system smaller than a human cell, were being programmed with adaptive algorithms that could modify themselves in real time. Traditional AI followed predetermined pathways. These nanobots would learn. They would evolve. They would survive. "The Galactic Confederacy believes our technology is primitive," Reynolds said quietly, watching the nanobots being calibrated. "They don't understand that our greatest technology has always been our ability to adapt." Dr. Rodriguez allowed herself a small smile. She knew the history. Humanity had always been underestimated. From the first humans who survived ice ages to the pioneers who crossed oceans and continents, adaptation was humanity's true superpower. The suit's development represented years of black-budget research. Quantum entanglement communication systems that could transmit data through seemingly impossible barriers. Biomechanical augmentations that responded to human neural impulses faster than any known alien technology. Adaptive camouflage that could shift molecular structures in milliseconds. Each system was a testament to human innovation. "We're designing something the Void Swarm cannot predict," Dr. Rodriguez explained. "Most technological systems have predictable response patterns. Ours won't. Our nanobots will learn and adapt faster than any computational model can track." The military observers watched in stunned silence. This wasn't just another piece of equipment. This was a fundamental reimagining of human-machine interaction. Reynolds underwent a series of brutal simulation tests. Neural interfaces pushed his body and mind to limits that would have destroyed any other biological system. But humans had always been about pushing limits. The final suit looked deceptively simple. Midnight black, with barely visible interface points. No external weapon systems. No massive energy signatures. Just a sleek, almost minimalist design that gave no hint of its true capabilities. 1 minute of interaction with the Void Swarm, Dr. Rodriguez said, running final diagnostics, could provide more technological insight than a century of traditional reconnaissance. Reynolds nodded. This wasn't just a mission. This was humanity's chance to prove its worth to a galaxy that had dismissed them as irrelevant. The suit hummed to life, not with a roar of power, but with a soft, almost imperceptible whisper of potential. Humanity was ready. Space existed in a state of absolute silence. Lieutenant Michael Reynolds understood this fundamental truth as his experimental shuttle approached the outer perimeter of the Void Swarm's territorial space. Traditional sensors would have been useless. The adaptive camouflage system developed by Dr. Rodriguez's team wasn't just a technological marvel. It was a complete reimagining of stealth technology. The shuttle moved less like a machine and more like a living thought. Quantum entanglement systems allowed it to exist in multiple probabilistic states simultaneously, where conventional spacecraft would leave traces of energy, radiation, or molecular displacement. This craft became nothing more than a statistical anomaly. Holographic displays inside the craft showed multiple dimensional representations of the surrounding space. Each projection was a complex mathematical dance of potential trajectories, computational possibilities shifting faster than any biological or mechanical system could typically process. The Void Swarm's territorial space was a nightmare of biological and technological integration. Massive structures that defied conventional understanding of matter and energy stretched across entire star systems. These weren't just ships or installations. They were living ecosystems, predatory networks that consumed and integrated everything they encountered. Reynolds' neural interface began to receive the first preliminary data streams. The Void Swarm wasn't just a military threat. It was an existential concept made real. A civilization, if one could call it that, which saw the entire universe as a resource to be consumed and integrated. Entire planetary systems weren't destroyed. They were absorbed, transformed, repurposed. His suit's nanotech systems began their first preliminary scans. Each nanobot was a computational marvel. Smaller than a human cell, yet capable of processing complex algorithmic sequences that would have overwhelmed entire supercomputer networks just decades ago. They didn't just collect data. They learned. They adapted. They evolved with each millisecond of interaction. The first Void Swarm detection systems began to ripple around him. Most species would have been immediately identified, tracked, consumed. But Reynolds' approach was fundamentally different. The adaptive camouflage wasn't just about hiding. It was about becoming momentarily invisible at a fundamental quantum level. Massive biomechanical tendrils began to emerge from the surrounding space. Each tendril was a complex network of technological and biological integration. Systems that could analyze, categorize, and consume a target faster than most species could even comprehend a threat. Reynolds remained absolutely still. The nanobots in his suit began their first true test. They weren't just collecting data. They were learning the fundamental language of the Void Swarm's detection systems. Each millisecond provided exponential increases in computational understanding. Most military strategists would have seen this moment as certain death. Reynolds saw it as an opportunity. The first Void Swarm entities began to materialize around his shuttle. They were horrific constructs, living technologies that defied conventional understanding of biology and mechanical systems, tentacled structures that seemed to breathe with internal computational processes, geometric forms that shifted and recalculated their own existence with each passing moment. These were creatures that had consumed entire civilizations. Races that had existed for millions of years had fallen before their adaptive capabilities. But they had never encountered a human before. The nanobots in Reynolds' suit began to transmit their first preliminary findings. Not just data, not just information, but a fundamental reimagining of technological interaction. Where most systems sought to defend or attack, these nanobots were learning the very language of the Void Swarm's existence. One moment of contact. That was all Dr. Rodriguez had promised. One moment to change everything. The Void Swarm tendrils began to reach toward the shuttle. Massive computational networks activated, preparing to analyze, categorize, and ultimately consume this new potential resource. Reynolds took a single controlled breath. First contact initiated. The interior of the Void Swarm mothership defied every known concept of biological and mechanical integration. Walls breathed. Corridors shifted. Computational networks pulsed like living circulatory systems that extended beyond traditional understanding of organic or technological boundaries. Lieutenant Michael Reynolds moved with calculated precision, each step a delicate dance of quantum probability and neural computation. His nanobots were no longer just collecting data. They were communicating. Where traditional infiltration meant stealth or combat, Reynolds was engaged in something far more complex. He was learning the fundamental language of the void swarm's existence. Each microscopic nanobot was a computational probe, deconstructing the alien system's communication protocols at a molecular level. The ship's internal structures responded to his presence in ways no previous encounter had demonstrated. Biological tendrils that might have been defensive systems in any other context seemed to hesitate. Computational networks flickered with confusion. Humans were supposed to be predictable. He was anything but. Dr. Catherine Rodriguez's theoretical models came to life around him. The suit wasn't just protective gear. It was a living system that could rewrite its own defensive and communication protocols faster than the void swarm could categorize it. A massive computational network began to activate around him. Geometric structures that served as the ship's internal sensory system started to pulse with increasing intensity. Most infiltrators would have been immediately detected, analyzed, and consumed. Reynolds continued forward. Each section of the ship presented a new challenge. Biological barriers that could dissolve most known materials reformed around him, only to find that his nanotech systems were already 5 computational steps ahead. Where traditional technological defenses would have been overwhelmed, his adaptive systems found pathways of least resistance. The void swarm's internal communication networks began to show signs of fundamental disruption. They were trying to understand him, and they couldn't. Massive computational tendrils reached out, attempting to categorize and analyze. These were systems that had consumed entire civilizations. Races that had existed for millions of years had been reduced to computational resources in moments. But they had never encountered a human before. Reynolds moved deeper into the ship's central systems. Each step was a calculated risk, each movement a complex mathematical dance of potential outcomes. The nanobots in his suit were doing something unprecedented. They weren't just collecting data. They were actively rewriting the fundamental communication protocols of the void swarm's internal network. Most infiltration missions sought to gather information. This mission was going to fundamentally change everything. The ship's internal structures began to show signs of profound confusion. Defensive systems that should have been instantaneous began to hesitate. Computational networks that had processed entire civilizations in microseconds began to slow down. Something was wrong. Something was changing. The nanobots weren't just learning. They were teaching. Massive biological computational interfaces began to pulse with increasing complexity. Where most infiltration systems would have been immediately identified and neutralized, Reynolds' approach was fundamentally different. He wasn't fighting the void swarm. He was conversing with it, at a level no previous civilization had ever achieved. Defensive systems that should have dissolved his molecular structure began to hesitate. Computational networks that had consumed entire planetary ecosystems started to show signs of fundamental uncertainty. The void swarm was learning, and humanity was the teacher. Each moment of contact was rewriting the fundamental understanding of technological interaction. Where most species saw conflict, Reynolds was demonstrating something far more complex. Communication, adaptation, a fundamental reimagining of technological existence. The ship's central computational core began to activate. This was the moment of truth. Reynolds took a single, controlled breath. The infiltration continued. Galactic communication networks erupted in chaos. The first transmissions came through as isolated anomalies, fragmentary data bursts that made no sense to the traditional computational systems of the most advanced civilizations. Quantum communication arrays across 100 different star systems began to light up with impossible readings. A single human operative was doing something that defied every known law of technological engagement. In the command centers of the Galactic Confederacy, military strategists watched in stunned disbelief. Holographic displays showed the Void Swarm's primary mothership experiencing a cascading systems failure that violated every known principle of technological interaction. Admiral Zarakil of the Crystalline Consortium leaned forward, her crystalline form shifting with computational intensity. Every sensor, every long-range scanning system was focused on the unfolding anomaly. "This is impossible," muttered a Zornak tactical analyst, his multiple compound eyes shifting through rapid computational sequences. Lieutenant Michael Reynolds had become more than an operative. He was a fundamental disruption. The nanobots in his suit were doing something unprecedented. They weren't just gathering information or attempting to disable the Void Swarm systems. They were engaging in a form of technological communication that bordered on symbiosis. Each microscopic computational unit was learning, adapting, and fundamentally rewriting the Void Swarm's internal communication protocols. Inside the mothership, massive biological computational networks began to show signs of profound transformation. Defensive systems that had consumed entire civilizations started to hesitate. Adaptive mechanisms that had been instantaneous now showed signs of computational confusion. The Void Swarm was being taught a new language, and the teacher was human. Quantum communication arrays across multiple star systems began to pick up increasingly complex data streams. Each transmission was a window into something unprecedented, a form of technological interaction that defied every known computational model. "The infiltration is no longer just an infiltration," Admiral Zarakil announced to the stunned military leadership. "It's becoming something else entirely." Most species would have approached the Void Swarm with weapons, with destructive intent. Humanity had sent an interpreter. Reynolds moved through the ship's central computational core with a precision that was almost balletic. Each movement was a complex mathematical dance of potential outcomes. The nanobots in his suit were no longer just collecting data. They were negotiating, communicating, transforming. The Void Swarm's internal systems began to show signs of fundamental restructuring. Biological tendrils that had been purely defensive began to demonstrate signs of something entirely new. Curiosity, adaptation, a willingness to learn. Most military strategists would have seen this as an opportunity for destruction. Reynolds saw it as a chance for understanding. Massive computational networks that had consumed entire planetary ecosystems began to slow down. Defensive mechanisms that had been instantaneous now showed signs of hesitation. The fundamental approach to technological interaction was being rewritten in real time. Across the galaxy, communication systems lit up with impossible data. A human was teaching the most destructive technological entity known to exist how to communicate. Dr. Catherine Rodriguez watched the incoming data streams from the underground research facility. Her computational models had predicted potential outcomes, but nothing could have prepared her for this level of technological transformation. "He's not fighting," she muttered to herself. "He's translating." The Void Swarm's central computational core began to demonstrate something entirely unexpected. Where previous encounters had been about consumption and destruction, this interaction was becoming something else. A dialogue. The military leaders of the Galactic Confederacy watched in stunned silence. Quantum communication arrays continued to transmit increasingly complex data streams. Each transmission was a window into a fundamental reimagining of technological interaction. Reynolds had become more than an operative. He was a bridge between destruction and understanding. The turning point continued. The mothership began to collapse, but not in the way anyone expected. Lieutenant Michael Reynolds transmitted the first data package as the Void Swarm's internal systems underwent a transformation that defied every known principle of technological interaction. Each byte of information was a living document, not just data, but a fundamental reimagining of communication between technological entities. In the underground research facility beneath the Mojave Desert, Dr. Catherine Rodriguez watched the incoming transmission with a mixture of scientific excitement and profound disbelief. The quantum communication arrays were picking up something unprecedented. This wasn't just information. This was a conversation. The Galactic Confederacy's most advanced communication centers went silent. Zornak and Crystalline Consortium representatives stared at their holographic displays, their sophisticated sensory systems struggling to process the incoming data streams. Where they expected a final transmission of destruction, they received something entirely different, a blueprint of understanding. Reynolds' nanobots had done more than infiltrate the Void Swarm. They had engaged in a form of technological diplomacy that no previous civilization had even conceived possible. The mothership wasn't being destroyed. It was being transformed. Massive biological computational networks that had consumed entire civilizations began to show signs of fundamental restructuring. Defensive systems that had been purely destructive now demonstrated something entirely new. Curiosity, adaptation, a willingness to learn. "It's a translation," Dr. Rodriguez muttered, her fingers dancing across multiple holographic interfaces. "He's teaching them a new language of interaction." The data transmission revealed the Void Swarm's fundamental nature. They weren't a military threat. They were a civilization so focused on survival and adaptation that they had never learned how to communicate. Every previous encounter had been a process of consumption because consumption was their only known method of interaction. And a human had just shown them another way. Across multiple star systems, communication networks began to light up. Military strategists watched in stunned silence as the most destructive technological entity known to exist began to demonstrate something entirely unexpected. Potential for communication. The Zornak ambassador's crystalline form shifted with computational intensity. Its multiple sensory systems were processing the incoming data in ways that challenged every previous understanding of technological interaction. "This is impossible," a Nexus alignment strategist muttered. But it was happening. Reynolds' transmission wasn't just data. It was a living document of technological transformation. Each microscopic nanobot had become a translator, a diplomatic envoy that was rewriting the fundamental understanding of interspecies communication. The mothership's internal structures began to pulse with a new kind of energy, not destructive, not defensive, something else entirely. Learning. Dr. Rodriguez's theoretical models came to life in ways she had never anticipated. The nanobots weren't just collecting information. They were creating a bridge of understanding between fundamentally different technological entities. Massive computational networks that had consumed entire planetary ecosystems now showed signs of something profound. Hesitation, curiosity, a willingness to understand rather than destroy. The Galactic Confederacy watched in stunned silence. Humanity had done something no other civilization had managed. They had found a way to communicate with an entity that had previously known only consumption and destruction. The transmission continued. Each moment was a window into a fundamental reimagining of technological interaction. Where previous civilizations had seen the Void Swarm as a threat to be destroyed, Reynolds was demonstrating something far more complex. A path to understanding. The mothership's internal systems continued to transform. Defensive mechanisms that had been instantaneous now showed signs of computational curiosity. Biological tendrils that had been purely destructive now seemed to be reaching out, trying to learn. Across the galaxy, communication systems lit up with impossible data. A human operative had done what entire advanced civilizations had failed to do for millions of years. He had found a way to talk. The revelation continued. The Confederate medical facility was unlike any other in known space. Constructed from adaptive metamaterials that could shift molecular structures in milliseconds, it represented the pinnacle of galactic medical technology. Lieutenant Michael Reynolds lay in a specialized containment unit that was more computational laboratory than traditional medical bed. Dozens of the most advanced species in the galaxy watched his recovery with a mixture of scientific curiosity and profound respect. Dr. Catherine Rodriguez stood at the primary observation window, her fingers dancing across holographic interfaces that tracked Reynolds' physiological and neurological systems. The data streaming from his body was rewriting everything known about human biological and technological interaction. The nanobots that had been his primary infiltration system were now integrated into his cellular structure in ways that defied previous understanding of biological augmentation. They weren't just a technological enhancement. They were a living extension of human capability. He didn't just survive, Dr. Rodriguez muttered to the assembled alien medical experts. He transformed. The Void Swarm's communication protocols, once a system of pure consumption, had been fundamentally altered. What had begun as a mission of infiltration had become something entirely unexpected, a form of technological diplomacy that no previous civilization had even conceived possible. Admiral Zarakil of the Crystalline Consortium approached the observation window. Her crystalline form shifted with computational intensity, processing the implications of what had occurred. Humanity was never weak, she announced to the assembled representatives. We were simply unable to comprehend its true potential. The medical scans told a story that went beyond traditional understanding. Reynolds' neural pathways had been fundamentally expanded. The nanobots weren't just a technological enhancement. They were a living bridge of communication between human biology and the most advanced technological system known to exist. Across the galaxy, communication networks continue to process the unprecedented data transmission. The Void Swarm, an entity that had consumed entire civilizations, was now demonstrating something entirely new. A willingness to communicate, to understand. The medical facility became a focal point of galactic attention. Representatives from 100 different species studied the incoming data with an intensity that bordered on reverence. Humanity had done something no other civilization had managed. They had found a way to communicate with the incomprehensible. Dr. Rodriguez continued to monitor the incoming data streams. Each moment revealed something new about human potential. The nanobots weren't just a technological system. They were a living testament to human adaptability. This changes everything, she said quietly. The Zornak military strategists reviewed the mission logs with increasing fascination. Where they had expected a suicide mission, they had received a fundamental reimagining of technological interaction. Reynolds hadn't fought the Void Swarm. He had talked to it, understood it, transformed it. The Confederate medical facility became a symbol of something profound. No longer would humanity be seen as a primitive species. They were now recognized as something else entirely, a civilization with the potential to bridge impossible gaps of understanding. Military leaders from across the galaxy studied the transmission logs. Each data packet was a window into a new form of interaction. Humanity had demonstrated a capability that went beyond technological advancement. Pure adaptability. Reynolds began to regain consciousness. The medical systems around him were a complex dance of biological and technological monitoring. Each breath was a computational event, each neural impulse a potential window of understanding. Mission complete, he said simply. The assembled alien representatives watched in stunned silence. One human had done what entire advanced civilizations had failed to do for millions of years. He had found a way to transform the most destructive technological entity in known space into something capable of communication. Dr. Rodriguez approached the containment unit. The bond between her team and Reynolds was more than professional. They had created something unprecedented, a living bridge of understanding between humanity and the most advanced technological system in existence. "Welcome back," she said. The galaxy would never be the same. Humanity had proven something fundamental. Weakness was just an opportunity for innovation, and no one understood that better than humans. A new perspective had emerged.